boxes stacked unevenly in the corner of the hallway. One wobbling slightly as she nudged it with a foot. "I think this one's heavier than it looks," she said, voice quiet, not demanding, just stating a fact. "Let me," I said, hands hovering for a moment, unsure if she needed help or was testing how far I'd go. Her fingers grazed the edge as I lifted it, careful. The box shifted slightly. She didn't step back, just watched, shoulders tense, eyes flicking somewhere between the ceiling and the floor. "You're stronger than most men I know," she said. Not a joke, not a compliment exactly, but something in between, like she'd discovered a fact she hadn't expected. I laughed, the sound small, uneven. My chest felt a little tight, like I'd just been noticed in a place I hadn't thought anyone noticed me at all. I glanced at her, mid-40s, subtle streaks of gray threading through dark hair, fingers lined with faint scars from some forgotten kitchen mishap or garden work. She wore a loose sweater that smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. Ordinary things, and yet everything about her felt deliberate, quiet, unhurried. She shifted another box toward me. "Careful, the bottom one's fragile," she said. Her eyes lingered just a second too long on mine, then darted away to the floor. I caught it. Not the glance, not entirely. The way her shoulders eased slightly as if she'd been holding a small weight she hadn't mentioned. "Fragile, got it," I said, lowering the box to the floor with care. My hands brushed hers, just for a second. She didn't pull away. I didn't step back. There was something ordinary about this moment that felt layered, like a song playing quietly behind a film I couldn't see. I noticed the thermos on the counter behind her, half full of lukewarm coffee. She reached for it, paused, then set it back. Her hands moved slowly over the cardboard boxes, brushing dust off edges, and I realized I was staring. Not just at her, but at the way she moved, the quiet rhythm of her body in a cluttered hallway. "I usually do this myself," she said, almost apologetic, a slight tilt to her head. "I shouldn't. I don't like bothering anyone." "You're not," I said, awkwardly folding a corner of the packing tape. "I don't mind. Honestly." She looked at me, eyes softening, but then the sound of her phone buzzing cut through the quiet. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and frowned faintly. I watched her thumb hover over it for a long moment before she slipped it back into her pocket. I wanted to ask, say something, anything, but the moment dissolved too quickly. Instead, I stacked the last box and stepped back. She leaned slightly against the wall, brushing hair out of her face, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thanks," she said finally. Just one word. "Any time," I said, voice quieter than I'd meant. She turned to head back down the hall, shoulders squared. I felt the small ache of wanting to say more but not knowing what. My hand itched to reach out again, but I didn't. Instead, I lingered, watching her disappear around the corner. Then, a soft vibration from her phone on the counter, another text. She glanced at it, paused, and for the first time, her expression faltered, unreadable, fragile. She tucked the phone under her arm as if hiding it from the world. I swallowed, unsure why I felt my heart rate spike. Something about that pause, that hesitation, it was an invitation. A door I hadn't expected to find. I wanted to knock. And yet, I stayed quiet. A week later, the boxes were mostly gone, stacked neatly by the wall, and somehow the hallway felt emptier without the quiet chaos. She had asked me to help again, this time with some old books and kitchenware she was moving into a small storage room. "You know," she said as we carried a stack of hardcover novels, "I never really read much as a kid." My mom, she had too many rules about what I could and couldn't touch. These books, they were mine only recently. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've got a lot of stories now." She smiled, small and fleeting, but it lingered. A little laugh, the kind that seemed meant for no one else, brushing past the edges of the silence. I wondered if she noticed me watching her, the way she pressed her lips together as she balanced another stack of dishes, or how her hands trembled slightly when she lifted the heavier boxes. There was a pause. I imagined all the reasons I shouldn't be here. 23, recently out of college, still figuring out rent and grocery runs. She, divorced, mid-40s, managing a household I barely knew. One wrong word, one misread glance, and the whole quiet connection might shatter. Yet here we were, side by side, sharing a chore that felt too ordinary to notice and too intimate not to. I found myself tracing the small lines on her hands with my eyes, the way the light fell on her hair, the subtle sigh when she realized the last box wouldn't fit where she wanted it. "Do you ever feel like you're carrying more than you should?" she asked suddenly, as we knelt on the floor, adjusting the boxes. Her voice was low, tentative. I hesitated, unsure if I should answer. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But maybe it's easier when someone helps." She glanced at me, a small flicker in her eyes, like she hadn't expected the answer. Then she laughed quietly, shaking her head. "I don't know, maybe you make it look easier than it is." We lingered there in the narrow storage room, surrounded by old furniture and cardboard. The air smelled faintly of dust and tea she'd set on a nearby counter. Neither of us spoke for a while, and I realized how rare silence could feel like an embrace. I imagined scenarios I shouldn't, holding her hand while stacking plates, sharing a late-night cup of tea on the counter, an ordinary evening that somehow became something else. My chest tightened at the thought, quickly dismissed. Finally she stood, brushing off her hands. I followed suit, and as she turned to leave, our fingers brushed. Not deliberately, not like a scene in a movie, just lightly. The contact lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and I caught her glance. She didn't pull away. "Thanks," she said softly, voice just above a whisper. But the weight behind it, it meant more than words. I nodded, heart quietly racing, and smiled in a way that tried to say, "I noticed. I feel it too." She didn't linger. But as she walked away, there was a small hesitation in her step, a softness in her posture that spoke louder than her voice. And I knew, whatever this was, it had already started. It was Saturday morning. The sunlight fell unevenly through the blinds, casting stripes across the kitchen floor. She was making tea, humming softly to herself, the sound low enough I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. I lingered by the counter, pretending to check my phone, but my eyes kept finding her. Her movements were careful, precise, pouring hot water, stirring sugar, pressing the teaspoon against the edge of the mug with a small, deliberate pause. "You've been here a lot," she said suddenly, not looking at me. "Just a statement. Neutral. Or maybe cautious." "Just helping," I said, voice a touch too quiet. My chest tightened at the defensiveness I didn't want to show. She turned, leaning slightly against the counter. The sunlight caught the faint lines around her eyes. "I know," she said. Pause. Then, softer, almost a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder if you're helping me, or if it's something else." I froze. Heart thudding. There it was, the question I didn't know how to answer. Not with words. Not yet. A sudden knock at the door made both of us jump. Her friend, someone I'd met only once, stood there with a clipboard and an apologetic smile. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "Just need a quick signature." She stepped back, giving me a polite smile. I nodded, hands fumbling with the mug. The ordinary disruption grounded me, though it didn't lessen the heat of the moment just past. When the door closed, we didn't speak immediately. The kitchen was quiet again, except for the hum of the kettle on the stove. I watched her trace the rim of her cup with her fingernail catching the sunlight. I imagined leaning closer. Just a little. The thought shivered through me, fleeting. I wanted to see if she would lean too. Instead, she looked at me, eyes soft but wary. "Maybe we should slow down," she said. Just a fragment of a sentence, enough to make my stomach drop. I nodded, though my body betrayed me. Hands clenched around the mug, a little too tight, knuckles white. I wanted to argue, to say, what? That I didn't want to slow down? That I wanted more than she could give? Words stuck, caught in the back of my throat. We moved in the same small space, each careful of proximity, yet our shoulders brushed once, then again, lingering just enough. My breath caught when she turned to reach for a sugar jar, and our faces were so close I could feel the heat of her cheek, faint perfume lingering in the morning air. Time stretched. A silence, heavier than any word, filled the kitchen. My hand hovered near hers. I imagined brushing it against hers, fingers grazing. My mind raced, imagining the next step, leaning in, feeling her warmth, the faint press of her lips, but stopped. She straightened, taking a step back. The moment dissolved. "Tea's ready," she said, voice casual, almost rehearsed. But I knew that under the calm, something had almost shifted. Something unspoken hung in the air, electric, unresolved. And I wondered if we would ever recover the quiet certainty that had existed before, or if this hesitation would linger, always between us. The park was nearly empty. Late afternoon sun slanted through the trees, painting the path in thin gold stripes. I walked beside her, careful to match her pace, though I felt every inch of distance between us. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. Small gestures so mundane, and yet they had me watching like a tide I couldn't stop. "I saw your friend yesterday," I said, voice low. Not accusing. Just noticing. She glanced at me, eyes briefly startled. "Oh?" Her tone was casual, but something in her shoulders stiffened. I kept my gaze forward, pretending it was about the path ahead, but my mind spun. Something about seeing her with someone else, someone her own age, someone familiar, made my chest tighten. Jealousy. Surprising, uninvited. "You seemed distracted," I added. My voice trailed off, unsure whether I wanted an answer or just to say the words aloud. She paused mid-step, looking down at the leaves crunching beneath our shoes. "I sometimes forget who I'm supposed to be around," she admitted softly. A fragment. Barely more than a whisper. I stopped walking. She stopped too. The quiet hung between us like a held breath. "I don't know why I keep letting you in," she said, voice trembling slightly. Her hand brushed against the strap of her bag, twisting it absently. "You're younger. Life is different." She stopped. I wanted to tell her, say something that would erase the hesitation, but all I could do was look at her, heart thudding, aware of the small tremor in her fingers. I swallowed. "I don't care," I said. Too softly, maybe, but true. I like being here. With you." She glanced up, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between us. Sunlight caught her hair. There was a tension in her jaw, a flicker of fear in her eyes. She wanted to move, or run, or say something that would undo the confession I hadn't fully made yet. "I shouldn't." She started, then stopped again. The wind shifted, leaves rattling softly above. I stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. My hands twitched, wanting to brush hers, touch her arm, anything to make the invisible distance vanish. But I stayed still. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice breaking just slightly. "Of feeling this. Of losing control. Of getting hurt." I nodded, but words failed me. What could I say? That I understood too well? That I already felt the ache, the pull, the impossible gravity of it all? She exhaled slowly, a quiet surrender to the moment. Her eyes flicked toward mine, searching, asking, though no words came. I swallowed again. The silence between us thickened, charged. And I wondered, do we step closer? Or do we turn back before we cross a line neither of us can uncross? She shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and I realized the question wasn't hers alone. She stopped answering my messages as quickly. A few texts went hours without a reply, then a day. The hallway felt emptier when I came by, the boxes long gone, the air less charged. I found myself waiting, phone in hand, counting minutes that felt like hours. When she finally appeared one afternoon, she looked different. Bag heavier, eyes shadowed. She smiled faintly, polite, but there was a distance I hadn't seen before. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, adjusting her coat. "I have some things I need to sort out." I nodded, unsure what to say. Her tone didn't invite questions. Yet the way her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her bag told me more than her words did. Something she hadn't said, something she didn't want me to ask. I imagined scenarios, maybe a child, a job, someone from the past, details that would explain the sudden caution. Each thought twisted a little in my chest. Hope. Confusion. Withdrawal. All tangled, impossible to separate. I tried to talk to bridge the distance. Do you want me to wait? My voice faltered, unsure if I even knew what waiting meant anymore. She shook her head gently. I can't promise anything right now, she said. Pause. A faint sigh. I need to figure things out. The words hit softly, like snow landing on bare skin. Quiet, but sharp. I left without asking more. On the walk home, I kept turning over everything, every look, every brush of hands, every half-laughed comment that suddenly felt heavy with unspoken meaning. The next day, I went by, hoping she might be there, a box to lift, a casual smile. But the hallway was empty. Coffee on the counter had gone cold. A chair pushed back against the wall, unoccupied. I wrote her a message, paused, deleted it. Tried again. Deleted. Something held me back, a fear of pushing too far, of breaking the fragile thread that still existed. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. Evenings were the worst. The sound of my phone buzzing set my chest racing, then disappointment when it wasn't her. I imagined her in another room, moving through her day, carrying the weight of a life I wasn't fully part of. The coffee shop on the corner, our usual, accidental, meeting place, felt strange. Empty chairs, silent machines. I lingered near the counter, waiting for a signal, a sign, a smile, but none came. I thought of the thermos she'd left behind one day, half full. I kept it in my own kitchen, a quiet reminder of something ordinary that had meant everything. Some nights, I would scroll through my unsent messages, reading the words I wanted to tell her, the confessions paused mid-sentence. Each one a weight, heavy and delicate at once. And still, I waited. Not for an answer exactly. Just for something. A chair left empty. A door unopened. A sentence incomplete. It was late afternoon. The sunlight slanted across the kitchen floor, softer now, warmer, touching the edges of the counter where she had left her cup. I lingered near the doorway, unsure whether to step in or turn back. She looked up from the dish she was drying, fingers slow, deliberate. A pause hung between us, thick but not oppressive. I didn't expect you, she said quietly, voice catching just slightly. Not a question, not an accusation, just a statement. I wanted to see you, I admitted, careful. Small words, the kind that felt like pulling something fragile from a drawer and holding it too close. She set the dish aside, wiping her hands on a towel. You could leave, she said. Pause. I wouldn't blame you. I shook my head. I don't want to. Silence. The sound of the faucet dripping, distant traffic outside, the faint rustle of her sweater. Ordinary noises, and yet they felt intimate, like we had the entire world contained in the kitchen. I've been avoiding this, she said finally, voice lower. Her eyes traced the edge of the counter, then flicked to mine. Because it's complicated. You're younger. I have baggage. Things I haven't fixed. She stopped, taking a breath that seemed to carry months of hesitation. I stepped closer. Not invading, just closing the small distance. I know, I said softly. I don't care about perfect timing. I don't care about baggage. My words faltered, trailing off. But my hands stayed at my sides, because some things weren't about touching. Not yet. Her eyes softened, a subtle shift I'd been waiting for. You want me here? She asked, almost whispering. Yes, I said, voice barely above the hum of the kitchen. I want to be here. With you. Even if it's messy. She nodded slowly, shoulders loosening slightly, a small exhale escaping her lips. The tension in her hands and the set of her jaw eased just a little. We stood there, close but not touching, sharing space in a way words hadn't captured before. It wasn't fireworks, or a grand confession. It was ordinary and exact, like a heartbeat that suddenly felt like a lifeline. Finally, she gave the smallest, tentative smile, and I mirrored it. Not a wide grin, not dramatic, just a quiet acknowledgement of the risk, of the connection. "Okay," she said softly, and I knew that in that single word, she'd chosen to stay, to let the uncertainty exist for a little longer. To let the moment be what it was. I nodded. "Okay," I echoed, letting it rest there, weightless and full at the same time. We didn't speak after that, not immediately. We moved around the kitchen, doing small things, rinsing a cup, adjusting a towel, stacking a plate. Each gesture carried the calm certainty of shared space, a human connection built in silence. And somehow, in that ordinary closeness, all the unsent messages, the paused breaths, the hesitations, they didn't feel so heavy anymore. The air between us hummed quietly, full of what could be, but still grounded. Months had passed. The boxes were long gone, the hallway cleared, yet somehow the faint echo of those first awkward mornings lingered. She still had her thermos, still made tea at 8:47 a.m., though now I sometimes poured my own cup, waiting for her smile across the counter. We fell into routines quietly, ordinary habits that felt intimate simply because they were shared. Folding laundry together. Brushing crumbs from the kitchen table. Sitting on the park bench at sunset, letting the world pass by. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed, just small, steady gestures that added up to a presence either of us had taken for granted. I noticed her glances still, though less in longing, more in comfort. The way she tucked hair behind her ear, the faint creases at the corners of her eyes when she laughed at something trivial. I traced the lines with memory, not desire. She noticed my hands lingering on mugs, on books, on the small everyday objects that had become ours. Occasionally, she would pause mid-step, a flash of hesitation, as if remembering the months when we had skirted around confessions, near touches, paused words. And I would smile gently, because I remembered too. The bench where we almost said more than we could, the kitchen where the air had thrummed with near confessions, the post-it note on a coffee cup left unsent. Life had grown messy in ways we hadn't planned, her work, my studies, errands, little dramas. But somehow those ordinary disruptions didn't fracture what we had built. They strengthened it. Quietly, persistently. One morning, she poured black coffee into 2 mugs and set one in front of me, exactly at 8:47 a.m., just as she always did. I didn't say anything, just reached across the counter and brushed a thumb along her hand while picking up the mug. She looked down, a faint, private smile tugging at her lips, and that was enough. No words. No declarations. Just acknowledgement. We sat on the park bench later, the sun slanting low. A dog ran past, children's laughter bounced in the distance, the air smelled faintly of wet grass and late summer. She leaned back slightly, resting her shoulder against mine. I didn't speak, she didn't either. Just 2 presences sharing the same space. In that moment, I realized, the love we had was quiet because it had to be earned. It was measured in pauses, gestures, small smiles, and everyday persistence. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't cinematic. But it was ours. And sometimes, when the world felt too loud, we would glance at each other and remember the boxes in the hallway, the thermos, the near confession in the kitchen, the paused words that had waited patiently for us. That history, the fragile, ordinary, intimate past, was ours alone. I sipped my coffee and thought, quietly, almost to myself, this is enough. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?